Did you know that if you were to put 10,000 women in a room, that less than 3 of those women would be pilots? And of those 2 or 3 women, it would be very unlikely, maybe impossible, to find someone who is both a fixed-wing pilot and a helicopter pilot. Not only is today's guest a pilot, which statistically would make this an extraordinary conversation, she's also a helicopter pilot. And if that were not enough, she's not only a pilot and a helicopter pilot, she's also a drone pilot who served 3 tours in Afghanistan flying reconnaissance missions. I guess what I'm trying to say is that today's guest is special. Shelbey Hooker is a woman of extraordinarily amazing talent, ability, experience, training, knowledge. She's been listed among those who are in the top 40 under 40 by the National Business Aviation Association for her work in brokering and selling aircraft. I'm confident that Shelby's aviation and life experience will help you discover a few of the little things that will add happiness, prosperity, and purpose to your life. Shelbey Hooker, welcome to the Plain Success Podcast.
Thanks. That's quite an intro. Forgot I did all that.
Well, we're going to help you remember some of that today, Shelby. And our hope is that by sharing some of what you've accomplished, what you've experienced, highs and lows, that we can inspire other aviators. I'm sure that there are other girls who were just like you and who are just like you right now and considering careers in aviation and wondering what that might look like. And you have such a broad range of experience, from helicopters to fixed wing airplanes to drones. I'm excited to hear how that all started. So did you grow up in an aviation family? How did you get started in this amazing career?
Yeah, that's actually a question I get a lot, is what brought me into aviation. And it's kind of a lot of experiences compounded. My dad was a captain, an airline captain, so it's pretty much all I ever knew. We always grew up flying standby and being at the airport. We were very used to it. We thought it was normal to fly. So it didn't seem like it was anything extraordinary to me. And then I grew up and I decided right after high school I wasn't going to go to college. I wanted to just snowboard. I thought that was going to be my future, right? Just this young kid, not thinking long term. So I spent a lot of time snowboarding. And then I started to realize that I wasn't making any money and I was really sacrificing my body. And so what could I do? What could I do to stay in the mountains and still get that exhilarating high? And so I decided that I was going to fly helicopters. I mean, it makes sense, right? I can do heli skiing and fly and still be in the mountains. And it just made sense to me. So that was the initial insertion into aviation.
So you were motivated by snowboarding to get into aviation.
It doesn't make sense, right? But I mean, that's how those two came together. Yeah.
And that was right after high school. So you're probably 17 or 18 years old or something like that.
Well, no, I spent quite a few years just snowboarding. So I didn't start flying the helicopters till I was 24, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was older.
So
relatively.
Yeah. So you grew up with your dad as a pilot. And so I'm assuming that you did a lot of flying then. What was your experience with flying, doing the standby flying thing? Was that enjoyable at the time? Or is that just something you didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about? It was just normal life growing up.
Yeah, it was just normal. I really didn't know that there was any other way to fly. dad was flying. And what was cool about having my dad as an airline captain growing up was when we were 12, there was always like an agreement that at your 12th birthday that you got to go on a trip with dad, right? So that was like so cool. You got to pick where you wanted to go. And, just being able to go on the airplane and be like, yeah, that's my dad. My dad's flying, and he makes the announcement and it's like, hey, my daughter's on board. And you just like feel like the coolest thing at 12. But I chose to go to New York with my dad. So that was my first trip. And I remember we were in the hotel room and we were looking down and Jewel, now I'm dating myself, Jewel was out there playing outside the hotel room. So that was a fun trip.
So at 12 years old, you're enjoying the life of aviation and from New York, looking down. And then how did you go then? So now you do a bunch of snowboarding and you decide, hey, I probably got to do something responsible and earn some money so I can do more snowboarding. So tell me, how did that land? Was your dad excited to have you joining him as a pilot? Was that not exciting for him? What did your family think about that decision?
Yeah, this is kind of a funny story. So my dad has always been an aviator. In high school, that's what he was doing. He was flying and, he worked at a photo shop so that he could make money and then it would turn into his flight hours that he was paying for. So that's all he ever knew. And then, he went through deregulation and then he started with America West and then he went with, U.S. Airways, and then it was American. And so he went through all these experiences in aviation of like a drastic change. And so it rocked his career a little bit, and he was a little jaded, I guess. And he wasn't the kind of pilot who would go spend the weekends flying around getting, the $25 hamburger. Like if he was done flying, he was done flying. Like that was now separated as a job, and then there was life that outside of aviation. And so I came to him and I was like, Dad, I'm going to go to flight school. And now remember, he's a little bit jaded because of his career path that it had taken and the struggles. And I said, Dad, I'm going to go to flight school. And he goes, no, you're not. Like, that's not like, let's explore some other ideas. Right. And I go, no, don't worry. I'm going to fly helicopters. And he said, over my dead body. And I was like, sold. Done. Like, don't tell me no, and it was great because he was even though he said over my dead body, I jokingly, but also like, I don't love this. He was my biggest cheerleader. I remember like my first solo, the way that the school was laid out, there was like huge windows upstairs and downstairs that overlooked the ramp. And so there was all the helicopters and you would take off and you land and you hover out to the taxiway and take off, and Dad would come without telling me and just sit there and watch my first solo and definitely my check ride, but he did not tell me that. And he was super into it. All of my initial ground schools, like he sat down and we went through everything, and it really kind of reignited his fire. I could see that, right? Like he went back to like the fundamentals, and it was really cool. He started to go to all the women in aviation events with me. We started doing the $25 hamburger, and he was a huge supporter.
That's awesome. It sounds like it can be difficult as an airline pilot to be really connected with your family because you spend a lot of time away, but it sounds like you had a great relationship with your dad. Yeah, we did. Airline pilots are definitely gone a lot, and we made it work. My mom was able to work and also help us, but like Christmases, sometimes we'd have to have Christmas on December 27th just because that's when Dad got home, and we were totally okay with it. We waited for Dad to make the holidays happen. Is there, from that flying experience with your dad, is there a favorite memory that stands out as you were attending these women in aviation events or just flying out to get lunch or something like that? Is there something that really stands out as a really, I guess, just a bright memory for you? With my dad? Yeah. Okay, I can think of three. The first time I took him in a helicopter.
So he's never been in a helicopter before, and then I'm flying the helicopter. So he's already nervous, right? Like now he has to fully trust me. And we went and landed on a mountain. And that approach for an airline captain who, has to keep his speed up to land. And I'm just like hovering and just coming in and then stopping to land on the top of the mountain. He was coming out of his skin. And he was just like, he didn't know what to do. And when we talked about it later, and we just laughed, right? Just like the differences in what I do and what he does, and that he just had to fully trust me, my training, and everything that I've done. So that was one. And then I started to, after he started to really enjoy aviation, I had a friend who had a P-51 out at Stellar. And so for Father's Day, his first Father's Day, that after I got into aviation, I got him a helicopter flight. So he ended up getting to go and do the controls. The second Father's Day, I got him a flight in a P-51, and I got all dressed up in the time appropriate attire, right? Did my hair, and he's like, "What are we doing?" Right? And I'm like, "Oh, let's go find out." And we just drove up to this P-51, and he got to fly in that, and it was the coolest thing. Like he was super into it. So just to kind of bring him back into like all the other elements that are aviation beyond just going to the airport, getting on your airplane, flying, and getting out and going to the hotel was super fun for us.
Now I have to interject here, Shelby. Father's Day is coming up again, and I like where this is going. I love the P-51. And so if you're just thinking, Alan, thank you for having me on the Plane Success podcast. Yeah. I would like to thank you with a ride in a P-51. I will gratefully accept that, Shelby. I just want to put that out there right now.
Well, I will remember that. The P-51s are getting harder and harder to find, right?
Absolutely. And people qualified to fly them. That's it's a generation of pilots that we're losing. Yeah. And, the rate of pilots that are picking up that historical aviation baton, I know is something that the aviation community is struggling with right now. Just having people that have the interest in those old warbirds, have the qualifications to fly them, and then have the financial ability to maintain that kind of airplane, because those are very distinct, different challenges, right?
100%. Yeah.
So you had a third memory with your dad. I don't want to derail us too much because I'm loving these experiences.
Well, so this one is going to throw me under the bus, okay? But I'll tell it because it's a joke that we still bring up as a family. But my dad, when he would fly with me, I was already rated, or actually no, maybe this was in my transition to the airplane. Yeah, so I kind of relied on my dad a little bit, and we would go do some flights together, and he would instruct me, but obviously as his father, he has a little bit more invested in making sure that my performance and my safety is like top notch, right? He allowed 0 errors. There was a 0 tolerance when I flew with him, and he was my hardest instructor. So we're doing some flights in the pattern. It was actually here at Falcon Field, and I wasn't landing right on center line. And he was not going to have it, right? And so he's like, if you don't land on center line, you might as well not fly the airplane. Like, if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And I'm like, okay, right. So it was like, fly center line. And so we always kind of joke like, oh, Shelby's a really great pilot, but she can never land on center line. But then too, on that flight, this story is again throwing me really under the bus, but going from helicopters to airplanes is a transition in itself, right? You have some muscle memory, especially on approaches. In the helicopter, you can come down and you just stop, right? You just pitch up, get the airflow down, airspeed down, and you bring it down. So transitionally, I was doing that in airplanes as well. And there was, I don't know if it was the same flight that I was screwing up center line, but I did that in the airplane. And my dad was like, what the are you doing? Right. And like slaps me upside the head and airspeed, and we're out of there. And I was like, truly, as we're flying away, I'm like, what did I do wrong? Oh, right. I was flying a helicopter that approach. I needed to fly an airplane. right? So
I can imagine how that muscle memory could affect you both ways. And then going from an airplane back to a helicopter, I imagine, could present its own challenges too, because they're two very unique flying experiences.
yeah, that was the really only time that I was like actively flying both helicopters and airplanes kind of back and forth. But then once I was like, went back to go get my commercial helicopter, I only flew the helicopter. And then after that, I only flew the airplane, right? There was never a time for me where I was like swapping,
Okay.
within a day or two. So,
Yeah. Um, I recognize that this could be maybe a sensitive subject, but I'm getting a picture of your dad and how protective he was, how involved that he was. Your family experienced a tragedy that didn't involve you directly, except as a member of the family. It was a very direct involvement. But with one of your sisters and with your dad, can you walk through that and what happened?
I mean, so you kind of want to hear like what happened to my sister, or,
Yeah, your family started the Red Note Foundation
mhm.
in memory of your sister Kristen, and I don't know a lot of the details there, except very briefly what I've been able to read online or what you shared, and it just seems like there was an incredible tragedy that happened, and now with this fresh picture of your dad's demand for safety in your flying, I'm just imagining that this was a very difficult experience for the entire family and especially for your dad. But can you just share about your sister, what happened, and how that experience has affected your family?
Sure. And two, with what you just said of dad's demand for safety, like after I tell this story, maybe we should go back and talk about that because it kind of goes in conjunction. But yeah, in 2004, so there's my family structure. There's two boys, two girls. My sister and I were 14 months apart. So really close, but then also fought a lot. But then really close. So in 2004, I had just graduated high school, and Kristen decided that she was going to get her motorcycle's license, which is great, right? We all supported it. She wanted to do that. So on her birthday, which was July 2nd, she went and did the test, passed her test. On 8 days later, July 10th, my dad and her went on a motorcycle ride up to Kearney, Arizona, and got pancakes. And then they were coming back, and as from what I can gather from witnesses and dad, is that basically she was coming down a hill and got the death wobble on a motorcycle, right, where it just like, kind of shakes. So she was trying to gain control. Dad was in front of her, and she ended up hitting a guardrail and initially just broke her ankle. But then because it curved around, she hit the guardrail kind of head on and went over the motorcycle. And they say that that was like she didn't suffer, right? So once all she felt was her ankle. The hardest part of that for us as a family was my dad watched it, right? So that as a dad, I can't even imagine. Um,
Yeah,
and
I'm having a hard time holding it together right now. I have five girls, Shelby, and so, you know, as a dad, it's my job to provide, to protect. And, I remember times pushing my kids, my girls on a swing, and maybe they get too high or something. I remember one of the girls falling off the swing and just feeling so horribly responsible that they got hurt. I can't even imagine what it would be like on the side of that road for your dad. Um,
yeah,
it's a depth of agony that maybe few get to experience, and I just can't imagine what that experience was for him. How did you find out about that? Take me through that a little bit. Was that your dad calling home? What do you remember from that?
today like really kind of showed the strength of my family to its core, right? It was pretty insane. So I was at work and I just my phone kept ringing and it was my sister's phone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, come on, I'm at work, right? And then the office line rang and at that point, like my sister's phone had stopped calling me and it was actually, my brother. And he was like, hey, Kristen was in a motorcycle accident. You need to get to the hospital. And I was like, oh, okay, right? Like, so I hurried over to my brother's house, my older brother's house, who he has two daughters. And they were like 8 and 10 maybe at the time. And the energy was just weird. And I get there and we're like, okay, let's go. We get in the car. And I remember being in the back of the car and my little niece Addie was on this side and my niece Corey was on this side. And then my younger brother calls me and he's just crying and he's like, she didn't make it. She didn't make it. And I was beside myself. The hardest part was that my mom was gone. Sorry.
Oh.
My mom was in Seattle and she had to come home on an airplane to what had just happened. So she was with some friends and they literally had to wheelchair her onto the airplane and she had to sit from Seattle to Phoenix just with her thoughts and that pain as a mom. I just can't even imagine. So we all came together. I got to see my sister. I got to say goodbyes and she was a phenomenal bassoonist. She played at Carnegie Hall. She missed her graduation because she was at Carnegie Hall at 17, playing her bassoon. She was phenomenal. And as much as I hated what happened, the way that her body was left, she would never have played her bassoon again. And so for me, I was like, she would have lost her happiness. So that kind of, for me, it helped me kind of feel okay with it. But, and then this is a story I share a lot and I actually have it. I don't know if I close it out, but we all came together at the house. Finally, my mom was there. All of our dear close friends were there and we were all kind of like trying to digest what happened. My sister's phone went off and there was a message and my dad looked at it and it said, "Smile, life is good." She had that reminder every day on her phone. And it was just like, okay, she's okay, right? Like life is still good. And it was just, so every day at 8:00, my phone does the same thing. Smile, life is good, right? And then she also had what was called her gratitude book. And she would write every day. Like, even if it's like, she loved pink lemonade, she'd write pink lemonade or like got to hang out with Shelby or like, just anything. In fact, I think Steve's in her gratitude book. So there's just like, that was always so good to go back to. And we as a family picked that up and we started writing a gratitude book because we needed to remind ourselves, like, this is seriously a lot that life gives us. But more importantly, my initial fear and backlash of all of this was my parents and their marriage. And, my dad got her into motorcycles, helped support this desire that she wanted. And we lost her because of it, right? So naturally you it weighs on a marriage and there's guilt and there's anger and there's blame. And my parents just came together. They were stronger. And my mom, for just her strength and her love for my dad and the family, was a phenomenal thing to watch. And she actually told my dad, don't sell your motorcycle. So she's like, just, if that's what you love, do it. Right. Like,
Wow.
what a strong woman to do that. So I, I commend my mom for that. And my dad did, he probably kept it for like 6 months, and then it was just too much. He did end up selling it, but, um,
Given that backdrop, Shelby, I'm now just astounded at your dad's willingness when you decide to fly airplanes. He knows the inherent danger of flying an airplane, and one of his hobbies, something that he loved, resulted in one of his daughters losing her life.
right.
And now here's another daughter who wants to pick up something else that's been a huge part of his life that has inherent danger. So, you know, I can, as a dad, I'm just seeing myself behind the glass of that FBO or the flight school, watching my daughter out in this helicopter and just praying that there isn't a repeat experience of what I've already experienced. Going through that one time is like superhuman. Being able to do that more than once, I can't even imagine having the strength or ability to do that. I'm just amazed at his support. And thank you for sharing what you did. I think sometimes we can look at people at a stage of their life. Could look at Shelby right now, and she's involved in aviation, and she's been a helicopter pilot and a fixed wing pilot, and she's selling private jets around the world. You can just look and say, man, she has just had a perfect life. Everything's easy and everything's great. And then you hear a story like this and you realize, wow, there is so much that we don't see. And I do want to ask, as a mom, how has that experience with your sister informed decisions that you make with your kids? Or how present to that are you with, I have a son that wants to go get a motorcycle, and I'm like, no way. 0% chance, not going to happen. And now I'm looking at your dad, I'm like, man, I either need to become a different dad or so. As a mom, how do you take these difficult experiences wrapped with the knowledge that you have of the danger in aviation, and how does that show up for you as a mom?
That is a really interesting question that you ask me, Alan, because it's a huge struggle. It's an incredibly huge struggle for me. I I would say that I have some PTSD with that. I do have a hard time letting go. I don't like to leave because I have the fear of, am I going to have that flight that my mom had, right?
Wow.
It's very, very hard, and it does affect me and my life. And so I'm trying to work through a lot of that, but in the same token and in the same breath, my son, he's a skateboarder. He's been skateboarding since he was 3. He's been snowboarding since he was 1. I have a picture of him with a little binky and riding down the mountain. And so I put him in these innately dangerous situations, knowing that could be an issue. And that could create some sort of scenario that would be very uncomfortable for me. And I'm okay with that, right? I have spent so much of my life just literally living on life's edge. I live for that. But I don't want to stop him from doing that, because, then it'll have a charge and that's all he's going to want to do. And then I'm going to live in this crazy trying to control him. But it's my own battle. It's my own fight to fight, and to know that he will be okay. And my dad's a prime example. Don't stop it.
Yeah, you said that you're trying to work through some of that PTSD still. That was 20 years ago. What does that journey look like? What are some of are there daily habits? I know I love the reminder that you have on your phone, and if nobody gets anything else out of this podcast other than to put a reminder on your phone about the beauty and the joy that can be found in life, even through
Right.
difficult things, I think this would have been worthwhile. But I would love to know, I'm sure there are things that have been intentional and other things that maybe you've just discovered along the way, but there are so many people that are dealing with hard things, the loss of a loved one or the ending of a career, the end of a marriage, whatever it might be. What are some of the tools that you or your family have utilized that have helped to deal with that and to help you enjoy the life that you have now?
Well, I mean, of course, there's going to be some hurdles to come, like to get over. But obviously, the low-hanging fruit on that one is the Red Note Foundation. My family and I, we started a nonprofit organization in my sister's memory. Now, remember, she passed away in 2004, and I started trying to create the nonprofit in 2012, and finally got it approved in for a 501c3 in 2013. So 9 years later was when we really had kind of the capacity to put ourselves back into everything that was Kristen. It was very hard. We had to balance that. You don't want to, we didn't want to start this story and cry every single time. We wanted to make it something that was good. So we really had to kind of do some internal growth, get some strength, and understand really what we needed to do. So that's why it took us 9 years to do that. But what we did was we started a nonprofit, and we called it the Red Note Foundation because Kristen was notorious for red. And our tagline was keep the music playing. And you can kind of see that was a play on keep her music playing.
Yeah.
So I have zero musical talent. Let's just be clear. My dad is a musician. My dad is a pianist. He sings. He's phenomenal. He loves to direct. So my sister kind of got that part of him, and then I got his aviation part of him. And so I relied on my dad to help kind of thrust me into what does music need and how can I support. So it really kind of brought his love for music and what he knew of the industry. And then I was just like steering my dad because he was all over the place. He wanted to do this. He wanted to do that. We got to do this. And he had grandiose ideas, which we actually were able to bring to fruition. But I would just have to steer him. I'm like, Dad, back over here, back over here, back over here. And together, my dad and I co-founded the Red Note Foundation, but really like my mom was the brains and the fuel behind it too.
So you had to keep your dad on center line when it came to the charity, and he was keeping you on center line when you were flying an airplane. This is great.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to tell him that. I'm going to bring that one up.
Yeah. Well, I think all of that is beautiful. I love seeing the relationship that you have with your family and how that is woven through so many different parts of your life, through aviation, but also through your sister's life with music. It sounds like you've learned a lot from the relationship that your parents have had. I do want to jump back into aviation because we've barely scratched the surface of your experience with aviation. So you've started, I'd love to know why you started flying planes, because it seems like you kind of choose one. I fly planes, haven't really put any thought into now I'd like to go fly a helicopter. Sounds intriguing, but it's a whole nother round of training and expense that I'm just not excited to sign up for at this point. So what was the motivation to do that? And then where did that lead? How did we get from there into drones? Because I want to know, I love the process of decision making that we're discovering with you.
Yeah, I fly by the seat of my pants, literally. So I got my helicopter's license, and I was starting to do my instrument in helicopters, and that was 2008, and that was when the economy kind of took a crash, and so they stopped funding loans for trade schools. I couldn't get any more money to go to to finish my helicopter commercial. So I had to kind of step back, and I was working at a local FBO, and they had a Piper Archer that had air conditioning. It had a Garmin, an autopilot, like all the things that everybody wants in an airplane, but it doesn't usually translate into a single engine piston airplane. But they had it. And the great thing was that for employees, you could use it at just the internal fuel rate. And if you had to have an instructor, you just paid the instructor. So internal fuel, I mean, I was paying like $10 an hour to fly an airplane. So I was like, I'd be an idiot to pass this up. I was a diehard helicopter rotor head. That's it. This is all I want to do. You airplane nerds, like, it's not my thing, right? That was my mentality going into it. And then this opportunity was too hard to pass up. So I'd work at the FBO. I'd start morning shifts, and I worked 6 to 2. And then I would fly the airplane from 2 to 5. And then I would go to Embry-Riddle Worldwide Campus. That was just across the way at Sky Harbor. And I'd go there from 5 to 10. So I was dedicated. That's what I wanted to do. I needed to get my bachelor's. I started late in life, and I was realizing all of the things that I needed to fix and get back in line. And that was one of them. So that's really why I got into airplanes. And then at the same time, I was going through college, and they kept talking about drones, and the future of the aviation industry was drones and unmanned unmanned aircraft. And I was like, dang it, like, why are these things coming? Like, this is going to ruin my career. They're going to take me out of the cockpit. Like, what am I doing? This sucks. Like, kind of upset that this is where the future is going, and I'm investing all my time into it, and it's just going to be taken away by unmanned airplanes. And then I was like, wait a second, who is Shelby Hooker to stop this? I can't. I might as well join it. So I'm like, if I can join this drone industry in the beginning, then I'll be able to grow exponentially from there. So I kind of shifted my thought process. And I had a friend who worked for a company based out of California, and I just reached out to him and was like, hey, like, can you help me get a job? And that's how that went.
So where did that lead? You get a job flying drones. Tell me what that looks like. I have no experience doing it. What's the potential in that field? Because I think even among pilots, I don't show up at the airport and there's not a bunch of people talking about flying drones. We're flying airplanes or flying helicopters. So that seems like a really niche community. And so what does that look like as a career? If there are people listening that are interested in getting into flying and that sounds appealing, tell me, walk us through that career path. What does it look like? What did you experience? Where did that end up?
I think that there's a huge misconception about what unmanned aircraft is. And I think that a lot of industry people, a lot of pilots, a lot of aviators, when they think of drones, they think of just a DJI. They just think that it's the hobbyist, and you get the certification and you can go fly. But I was much deeper into the drone world, the unmanned aircraft world than that. And I was able to kind of see a lot of the opportunity and where they could go. But when I started flying, I was flying I flew the Predator, MQ-1B, MQ-1C, and the MQ-9 Reaper, ultimately. And, just for an example, that airplane is 10,500 pounds, and the Honda Jet is 10,600 pounds. So, I mean, it's not your carry the drone in the pack and go fly at the park, right? It's a big airplane, and it commands respect. I remember when I first started flying, we were in the GCS, which is basically the cockpit, the ground control station, and it's computers, right? You have a computer on top, computer on bottom, and keyboard, and you're flying from that. And all of the things as a pilot that you're taught, feel your airplane, sit in the airplane, fly, feel it, what's it doing? All of that goes out the window, and you have to fly based on what the computer is telling you. And it was just a weird transition. But I remember specifically one time the GCSs were kind of right next to the runway, and I heard this airplane just fly by. And I was like, that's us. Like, but it just flew by, right? So it was so weird and an out-of-body experience, literally. Like, I'm not in the airplane, but I'm operating that one that just took off, and
wow,
it was very interesting. Yeah.
And what were the missions that you were performing with those unmanned aircraft? And walk us through that. You're in this control center. I love that it was almost a shock to hear the plane that you're flying taking off.
Yeah.
Walk us through a typical day, and what were some of the missions that you were doing?
Oh, so when I first started with that company, I was not prepared for what I really signed up for. The company basically they manufactured the Predator, and then at the same time, I would do all the training I trained on the airplane, learned how to fly it, had to do a few CONUS deployments, which means in the U.S., and those were fine. But the elephant in the room that I was almost kind of avoiding was the fact that I was going to have to deploy. And, as part of the contracts with government agencies, we went with the airplane, and we would go and fly those missions. We were non-combatant civilians, but we would deploy. And so finally that day kind of came, and I was like, I have to go. And it's really ironic, because if we go back to when I started flying helicopters, I got asked the question a lot, like, why don't you just join the military? Why don't you get it paid for? Because first of all, not very many people go civilian helicopter, right? Because that's expensive. And then not many people go helicopter then airplane, because that's really expensive. Like, I did it backwards. And I said, well, because I didn't want to deploy. That was always my response. I didn't want to deploy, and I didn't want to put my dad through the deployments, right? But here I am now choosing to deploy, even after all of that. So.
And what does deployment look like? Is that a change of location? Is that just a change of job description? Walk me through what that really is, because I don't know, and I imagine there's a lot of people listening that have no idea, one, that there are civilian contractors that are helping to operate these unmanned vehicles, and two, what that really entails to be deployed with that airframe.
Yeah. So we were technically the subject matter experts on these airframes, on the Predators. So as such, we were assigned to go and support military efforts with the aircraft as a contract. Whether that meant, like I said, if I did a CONUS deployment and I went and we were supporting the Army in their training, we would sometimes sit and, just watch what the Army's doing. And if something goes wrong, that we could take over the airplane and land it safely, bounce questions off of us, however we could support that airplane and its operations. And then same kind of story when we would deploy. Job description didn't change. We just kind of chased the airplanes and the contracts. And so that meant that we would have to, we had deployments all over the world, but mine specifically was to Afghanistan, and I went 3 times to support missions. And there's also different kind of missions, every deployment, what you do is a little bit different. You could be actively flying the missions. You could be, just watching the mission to support military efforts. Or you could do what they call as LRE, which is launch and recovery. So you would launch, take off the airplane, and then you would hand it off to a military unit somewhere else. And then they would do the mission, and then they'd call up, be like, hey, we're done. Super Bowl's on. We don't want to fly anymore. And then we'd pick it up and land it.
So you physically went to Afghanistan for these deployments?
I did, yes. Yeah.
That seems like a terrifying experience. Can you tell me what you were going through as you experienced that, and what was life like through any of those missions, whether you're observing or the launch and recovery or you're actively flying those missions? Um, here you are, woman from Gilbert, young. How old were you at this time?
I had my first deployment. I had my 25th birthday over there.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you're in your mid 20s.
yeah,
This is a long way from snowboarding.
yeah,
What?
yeah.
Tell me what was running through your mind, and because we've talked about him a lot, I would love to know how your dad responded during this new change of events. Now you've gone from flying helicopters to airplanes, and now you're being sent to Afghanistan. He's got to be losing his mind at this point.
Yeah. Well, he knows me, right? He's not surprised by all the drastic drama and all the changes, right? But I mean, I changed trajectory several times in my life, in my career, and it's been great because a lot of the when you get into aviation, a lot of people have this idea that you go airlines. If you're flying, you're an airline pilot, right? People are like, "Oh, you're a pilot. Who do you fly? What airline?" And there's so many vast opportunities within aviation that are kind of overlooked. And as I got into it, I kept being like, oh, I want to try that. I want to try that. So that's how I landed here. But to answer your question, what was I thinking? I I wrote it down, and it's pretty intense because again, I kind of went into this blind and ignorant. And our first stop was in London, and I was like, this is so cool. I'm in London, like I get to travel. The next stop was in Dubai, and Dubai was cool, but it was like 120 degrees and 130% humidity. And I was like, get me out of here. Like it was not a fun place to hang out. And then at the same time, like my first like kind of cultural shock was in the Dubai airport where I was in line to, I don't remember if it was check in or get my bag or something, but I was in line, and this gentleman came and stepped right in front of me in line. And I was like, excuse me, I was here. Right. And so I go in front of him, and I had insulted him on a whole different level. And so his response made me say, oh yeah. Right. And thankfully one of my other crew members were there, and we were like, hey, let's just move. Like, let's just remove ourselves. But that was the beginning of a lot of cultural experiences that I was not prepared for and ignorant to. And, ultimately ended up having me grow a lot of appreciation for what we do have. But so that was Dubai. And then we fly from Dubai into Bagram, Afghanistan. And I remember, I like vividly remember getting off of I wasn't even off the airplane. I was at the top of the stairs, the air stairs, and looking out, and it's just like this world of brown tents, brown ground, brown clothes, and gray airplanes. And I literally stopped and said, in my head, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, and I remember this, I said, I'm a daddy's girl. Like, I don't belong here. And that was the first, like, holy shit. And we got on the bus, and thankfully my roommate Bob was with me, because he was just like, he just held me up a lot and was like, we're going to get through this. He's like, are you okay? And I just cried. I said, no, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I ended up having to stay in Bagram for a couple days before I ended up going over to my base. And so I didn't have a place to sleep. They didn't have a room for me because I wasn't supposed to be there. So I ended up staying on a cot, just trying to figure out where the showers were that were up the street and around the corner that you get dirty going to and dirty coming back because there's just dust everywhere. And I'm just like, okay, maybe once I get to my base, then I'll be settled. Then it'll feel good, right? Like that's what's going to happen. Long story short, that's not what happened, but I was trying to stay positive. I then I get to my base. And at that point, because I was delayed a couple days, you basically do a handoff with whoever you're replacing. And that crew member had been waiting for me to get there, and he needed to hustle and get on the airplane that he was leaving on. So I didn't really get a handoff, and it was nighttime. And the way the base was there's segments of like, hey, here's where this operation works, here's where this operation works. And they're all kind of in compounds, and they're really separated, and you drive between them at this particular base. So I had to drive around the runway at the end, drop him off on the other side of the airport, and then find my way in the dark back to where we were. And it's pitch black. Right? There's no street lights. It's pitch black, and they have checkpoints with Afghani locals, and they have rifles. So it's just me, myself, and I in this car in my first 5 hours at the base, and I have to go up to this Afghani local who has a rifle and checkpoint. And I was like, is this it? Like, is this, first of all, is this normal? Is this normal that I check in with him and move on? Like, I don't know. And so I'm just praying that it's all going to come out okay. Like,
Wow.
yeah. So I'd stop and I'd say, hi, show him my credentials, and he passes me on. I later learn that you give them energy drinks and they love it, and they'll just be like, yeah, go ahead. Like, that was just like your free
That was the
pass.
currency.
Yeah, right. It was like, hey, thanks for doing what you're doing. Here's an energy drink. And then I learned, dashakur, which is thank you. So that was like the one word I learned. And I went back to my base and learned a lot more after that. But that was my first couple hours.
That's incredible. And given what you're doing right now, it seems almost unbelievable, because the clientele that you're working with now, the experiences that you're working with right now, certainly don't involve dusty trips to the shower around the block or checkpoints with Afghani riflemen. Tell me about what you do right now, because this is another fascinating part of aviation that I think a lot of people just have no idea even exists, and is a really neat community all in its own. And that's the business side of aviation. So walk me through what you're doing right now, how you got there, and how are you enjoying it?
Oh, how did I get here? That's a whole that's just another stumbled upon situation. So after I was done deploying, I came back and I went to the FBO that I was working at prior to deployments. And that's where they were the Honda Jet dealer. And so I started working on the Honda Jet program way before they started actually delivering the airplanes. So the first delivery was, technically December 2015, but the 2016 for sake. And I started working on the program in 2014, which lended me the opportunity to, go to the maintenance school, go to the engine school, go to the flight school, because I had 2 years before they started to actually deliver the airplanes. And once those deliveries happened, my role was to support the owners. There's the process of like wanting to buy the airplane, buying the airplane, and then holy crap, what do I do with the airplane afterwards, right? Like, aircraft ownership is complicated and can be complicated, and it can be very emotional. These owners are buying their airplanes, and that's their baby. It's one of their favorite assets, and they want it to be a great experience, or at least I wanted it to be a great experience for my clients. So I started to do aircraft ownership, help manage ownership experience and all of the things that come with it. And then that took me into the aircraft sales. So I went from the back side of the experience into the front side experience. And so now I sell private jets. And like you said, it's totally drastically different than, the Afghanistan experiences to what I'm doing now. But it's great. It wasn't something that I was like going for. It's not the job that I was like, I want to sell private jets. But as I started to build these relationships with these clients, it kind of changed my perspective. You know, a lot of salespeople have the sales persona or sales reputation inevitably, right? I'm a salesperson. So they think that you always want to push a product onto them. And I operate completely different just because I saw how the ownership experience was. I operate not transactional. I'm not a transactional person. I want to make sure that my client and my owner goes in an airplane that is right for their mission, that's right for their operation, that's right for their family. And that's really fun for me.
I imagine that for the people that are coming to you, if we can paint a picture of maybe somebody who for the first time they've achieved a level of success, they're traveling for work, or maybe they just want to facilitate private travel with their family. What is that client feeling and experiencing? Because this has got to be just like a dream come true for a lot of people. And so I look at you and I'm like, she just makes dreams come true for people. That's her job description. So tell me what that experience is like for them and what it's like for you.
It's funny because I do this all day, every day, right? I live, eat, and breathe aviation. So for me, it's such a simple thing. It's like yes, you buy the airplane, we close, we get you on a management, we'll hire the pilot, we got your insurance, all of those things. That's just how the process works. And sometimes I have to remind myself, like, if it is a first time aircraft buyer, they don't know, right? So I may be simplifying it when really I need to go through the details of what it really means to own an airplane. What are they going to have to experience? And the easiest and the best way to do that is connect an aircraft owner with a potential aircraft owner, right? Let those two kind of talk what they felt, explain the emotions, like where is this new buyer feeling angst and where are they at right now, and how this current owner can say, yep, that's totally normal. Yep, feel that. Yep, trust this person, but look at maybe this option. And connecting people. You don't have to trust me. I know everyone that you can trust too. And I help connect you with those people. I mean, that goes for aircraft owners, insurance brokers, tax consultants, management companies, all of those we work together to help support the process.
That's awesome. What, with the aircraft you're dealing with now, do you have a favorite? Is there just an aircraft that you love to fly or you love to sell or you wish someday you hope to have? What would be on that list?
I don't play favorites.
No favorites.
Yeah, no, I mean, it truly just comes down to what works for the client. What is best for the client, right?
Is there one that is maybe the most common? Because I imagine that, I know it may be hard because you might have people that need to travel across the country and you may have people that just need to travel from one state to the next. And that's a very different aircraft, or it can be. But when somebody comes to you, let's just say, if this were me, so I travel between Phoenix and San Diego at least once a week for work, and then there are probably monthly trips to places like Texas, Colorado, Utah, Seattle. So maybe not cross country, but certainly crossing a few state lines. So I come to you and Shelby, my real estate business is doing great. I need a pilot and an aircraft. Walk me through what that process would look like so that if we have people that are listening, they know exactly what to expect when they talk to you.
Yeah, so there's still a few things that I would need to know. Your mission is great. Those aren't super long trips, so we're not looking at a larger airplane. Budget comes into play. How many passengers do you expect to have on your trips? Is it you and your wife? Are you going to be bringing some of your company? How many times is your wife going to come? How many times are you going to max out the airplane? Because a lot of the times what people do is they say, well, I'm going to have 8 people. Okay, how many times are you going to have those 8 people? And it's like, oh, twice a year we do a trip. Okay, is buying that extra $5 million in an airplane worth those 2 trips, right? Or should you just charter those 2 trips? So those kind of questions come in. The budget, passenger load, those would kind of affect, do you want to fly or do you want to be flown, right? Because there's owner-friendly airplanes and not so owner-friendly airplanes to operate. And what's your flying experience? Where do you want to go with your flying experience? So to answer your question, there's not like one airplane that fits your example. There's a lot of things that go into picking out which airplane would be best.
So you go through quite a discovery process with every client you're working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
And sometimes I tell them, you don't need to buy an airplane. You know, is buying an airplane even right for you? It can be a no.
I would prefer that you not say that in front of my wife. Let's just stick with, you need an airplane, Alan. And
see, let me know that on the backside.
Okay. I'll make sure, and I'll bring you an energy drink to make sure we get past that checkpoint in the guard shack.
Yeah.
So a couple of things as we wrap up, because I want to be respectful of your time. First one is, if you're looking at, let's say it's one of your kids, or I'm assuming that as you go to these women in aviation events, you're getting young girls and you're looking back at yourself at 16, 17, 18 years old. What advice would you give to them as regarding a career in aviation? Let's just speak to that first. So what would you say to that young girl looking back on your experience?
You know, my dad kind of instilled this in me, and it has paid dividends, and it's truly, if you want the job, earn it. You know, do what you have to do to be the best of the best at that role. You know, don't just because you want it, you're not going to get it, right? You have to go in ready to put in the work and ready to commit yourself to what you're doing. And that actually was a lot of what got me through the deployments, right? Like, I was not going to give up. Don't give up. It's going to be hard, but put in the work and it's worth it.
I love that. One of my favorite quotes is actually something Abraham Lincoln said. He said, "Whatever you are, be a good one." And it sounds like your dad was giving the same advice. If you want it, go and be the best at it. I love that. What about maybe the person who loves airplanes and is considering a career doing what you're doing now in sales? How do you get into that kind of a role? Is it difficult to find that kind of a position? Are there people actively looking, or how would somebody get into that kind of opportunity?
You know, because I got lucky and because I was in the right place, I don't have the best advice for that. But I mean, like I said, if you want to do it, you can do it. It's definitely a tight-knit group. Brokers know brokers, dealers know dealers. We all work together to make the customer support happen. So it's really just getting in and knowing who's who and knowing what's what. It's to do your own kind of brokerage is a difficult thing. Is it possible? Absolutely. You know, you can join a firm. You know, I'm with Soul Jets. We're based out of Park City, and we're a strong team and we're growing. And having that support of each other is a wonderful thing. The whole firm backs up every single deal that we do, and it's a great support system. There's other ways that you can do it. There's, you know, if you want to do your own brokerage, and you feel like you can, then that's great. There's so many different ways, but definitely get in there, get invested, understand who's doing what, and meet those people.
Okay, so last scenario is we're going to fast forward a few years, and now maybe one of your kids comes to you and they want to fly a helicopter or want to fly an airplane. How are you going to respond to that, and how would you be feeling, and what would you tell them?
Actually, I think of this quite frequently, because just as like a military deployment, what would I do, right? As a family, we support the troops very strongly. We all of my books are military books, right? And we watch all the war video movies, and we love that kind of stuff. And but then I put myself in as a mom sending my son off to a deployment, and that's really a scary thing for me. And does he want to fly? So the flying part doesn't worry me so much. That it's innately safe, follow the rules, land on center line, hold your altitude, those sort of things. If you can teach your children that. But, that, like I said, that's kind of a battle that I have to figure out myself. So I don't know that I have strong advice on how to handle that, because I'm a little bit of a protective mom.
Yeah. So one last question, and we'll wrap things up. Maybe a piece of life advice or counsel learned from aviation that you would just share with anybody that's listening to us today.
It's that cliche line, be ahead of the airplane, right? I always think of that when I'm driving and in life. Always be ahead of the airplane, right? Don't hang on the tail as it's flying away from you. And that's just life too, right? Prepare yourself, be prepared, and know which direction you're going to go, but be ready to shift, right? Be ready for a redirect.
I love that that's the advice that you're sharing, because it seems like from the beginning of our show to the end, you were more hanging on to the tail as your aviation career took off. But it seems like maybe you're out in front of the airplane a little bit more now, so that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I fall back sometimes, but just get up there. Yeah.
Shelby, if somebody wants to connect with you, what's the easiest way to do that? If maybe they're looking in the market for an aircraft, or they want advice on career paths to follow or to chat with you about your experience, how would someone connect with you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then, of course, you can go souljets.com, and my contact info is on there.
Awesome, Shelby. Thanks for spending some time with us today on the Plane Success Podcast. This has been a lot of fun.
Good. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Well, what do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories I could tell.
Well, we'll have to do a round 2 and get into some of those stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, did you get what you wanted out of this? Was I able to kind of portray where you wanted to go?
Again, I'll tell you my reason behind this podcast is I have a 22-year-old son. Mm-hmm. He's completed half of his check ride. So he did the oral part. And then when they went out to the airplane, there was a mechanical issue. And so he couldn't do the flight part. He's also just broken off an engagement and is kind of at a place in life where he's like, man, my check ride fell apart. My relationship fell apart.
Right.
I just don't know what direction to go. And so my hope is that with this podcast, I provide an opportunity for him to hear Dad giving some advice, but through the lens of some other people who have had hard times. Like, you didn't start out with a perfect career. It wasn't all roses and rainbows. You've had to figure things out along the way. And there've been transitions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's my purpose. That's purpose number 1. Purpose number 2 is I love general aviation. And I think that there's, whether it's intentional or not, I just think people don't really understand all the good that happens in general aviation and all the different career paths that exist. You can own or operate an FBO. You can own or operate a repair shop. You can, like you're doing, brokering or sales, which is an amazing career all by itself. You can, all kinds of different piloting. Oh my gosh. Like, there's an endless array of things that you can be doing there. So, that's the purpose. Help my kids be the people that we want them to be. Help my guests shine a light on you so that, whatever that means, it can be helpful. And then also just general aviation. And I want to raise awareness for awesome nonprofit organizations. So, by those measures, I think it's been a phenomenal success today. So.
Good. Well, I have, I was thinking too, I've got a few folks that would probably be good guests for you too.
And that would be the biggest compliment and the biggest help. That's the biggest challenge is it's not like everybody advertises on LinkedIn, hey, I bought a jet, I'm a private pilot, but that's who I want to connect with. Guys like me, girls like you who had some measure of success and love aviation.
So I've got this guy, Alex, who he's actually with MBAA. And what he does is he goes in and fights for business aviation and general aviation at the airport level. So like Santa Monica was his baby, right? But the interesting story about Alex is he's a Russian immigrant with his father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he was born in Russia and they had to give everything up and come here. And his grandpa was in the Russian military as a pilot. So that's a super cool story. And then the other gentleman I was thinking of, very well spoken. He's on, have you ever seen Air Disasters?
I don't know if I have or not.
Okay, that show, it's one of my favorites, as weird as that sounds.
My wife was like, why do you keep watching these accident crash videos? I'm like, because it's a possibility and I learn from it. Like,
Right. I know the last two have kind of hit a little bit too close to home, but
which ones?
The Hawker and the Challenger in Florida. Yeah. Both of them were NetJets.
What a terrible story.
Yeah, awful. But so Phil was kind of a narrator on what am I thinking? What was the show I just said?
On aviation, Air Disasters.
So he's like a aviation consultant, but then he's also in MBAA as well. And he used to be a load master. He's not a pilot, but he's very involved in business aviation and the growth of it, and very, very, very well spoken. So anyways, those
that
would be great.
Perfect. Yeah. I would love, and anybody else that pops to mind, I would love an email introduction or a text introduction. I'd be very grateful for that.
Yeah, Beatrice, another girlfriend of mine who actually sells Falcons, and she's from Sweden and moved here to go to, I think she moved here to go to Embry-Riddle, and now she's selling for Dassault, the Falcons, so she could be a good one too.
Yeah, and especially women in aviation, because there are so few. It's easier for me to find guys, but
Sure.
I really would love to highlight. I've got a daughter who would like to be a pilot too. She's 15 right now, and I want to encourage her to follow the dream. I mean, I know there's some danger there, but there's equal danger in everything else we do in life, I think. So,
Right.
Yeah. And thanks for being so vulnerable with your sister. I just read a little bit of that story, and I can't even imagine from the standpoint of a sibling or a dad or a mom how tragic that day must have been.
My dad's sweet too. He would always, he tried to fly me as far as he could to my deployment, right?
Oh,
So
that's
he would
awesome.
pick up the flight that was taking me, wherever, so he could take me as far as he could.
Yeah. Sounds like I need to have him on the podcast. We'll get some of these stories from his perspective.
Oh my gosh, he's a riot. Yeah, he's a riot. That could be fun. We'd go back and forth with him.
Yeah, that could be a lot of fun. I was actually thinking that as we were going, I haven't envisioned that format yet, but it could be a lot of fun. So we'll have to try it on for size and just see what comes out of it.
Well, cool. I hope this was a success for you, and thanks for inviting me on my first podcast.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. I hope the rest of your day is awesome.